He is one of the most celebrated actors who ever lived. A man who transformed himself into monsters, saints, and everything in between. A man Hollywood could never fully predict. But nothing in Robert De Niro's career surprised people more than his personal life. Because somewhere between the bright lights of Hollywood and the quiet corners of an ordinary restaurant, one of the world's most guarded men fell in love with a woman almost no one had heard of. A woman from humble roots, a woman who would become his wife, the mother of his child, and eventually the center of one of the most quietly painful separations in celebrity history. Her name is Grace Hightower, and her story is one worth telling. To understand why this love story captured so much attention, you first have to understand who Robert De Niro was by the time Grace entered his life. By the late 1980s, De Niro was not simply famous. He was a monument. His performance in Raging Bull had earned him an Academy Award. His work in The Godfather Part 2 had already secured another. He had given American cinema some of its most haunting and unforgettable characters. Travis Bickle, Jake LaMotta, Vito Corleone. Off-screen, De Niro was known for being intensely private, fiercely protective of his personal life, and deeply committed to his craft above all else. He was not a tabloid fixture. He did not chase headlines. He was, by most accounts, a serious man in a world that preferred spectacle. That seriousness made his romantic choices all the more fascinating to the public. When word began to spread about a new woman in his life, people paid attention. The year was 1987. Robert De Niro was in London, a city he had visited many times for work and personal travel. On one of those evenings, he walked into Mr. Chow, an upscale restaurant in Knightsbridge that had long been a gathering place for artists, celebrities, and the culturally curious. It was there that he met Grace Hightower. Grace was working at the restaurant at the time, described by those who knew her as warm, composed, and quietly magnetic. She had grown up in Killen, a small town in Alabama, raised in modest circumstances far removed from the world De Niro inhabited. She was not a celebrity. She was not a model chasing fame or an actress, angling for attention. She was simply a woman doing her work, living her life. And somehow, that ordinariness was exactly what drew De Niro in. The two began spending time together. What started as a quiet connection slowly deepened into something neither of them appeared to be looking for. Their relationship developed over several years before it became public knowledge. By the time people began to notice, it was already something real. The contrast was not lost on anyone. Here was a man who had spent decades playing some of cinema's most complex, volatile characters, and he had found something steady and grounding in a woman from a small Alabama town who had no interest in the spotlight. When news of their relationship became widely known, the media responded with curiosity that ranged from warm to invasive. Entertainment reporters focused heavily on the contrast between their worlds. Headlines noted the difference in their backgrounds, their social circles, and their public profiles. Some commentary was genuinely admiring. There was something almost romantic in the idea of Hollywood's most intense actor falling for someone who existed entirely outside of that world. It felt, to many, like a story about authenticity, about a man choosing a real life over a curated one. But there was also scrutiny. Grace was black and De Niro was white, and while interracial relationships were far from unusual by the late 1980s, the racial dynamic was still noted, examined, and in some corners quietly questioned. For her part, Grace carried herself with dignity throughout the early years of public attention. She did not seek interviews. She did not position herself as a celebrity by association. She let the relationship speak for itself. De Niro characteristically said very little publicly and seemed to prefer it that way. After nearly a decade together, Robert De Niro and Grace Hightower married in 1997. The ceremony was a private affair, consistent with the way both of them had always approached their relationship. There were no grand magazine spreads, no televised events, just a commitment made quietly, away from the cameras that trailed De Niro wherever he went. 1 year later, in 1998, Grace gave birth to their son. Elliot De Niro was already a father, having previously had children with other partners. But this chapter felt different to those watching from the outside. There was a visible warmth in how he spoke about his family during this period. He seemed, by his own understated standards, content. Grace, for her time, embraced motherhood while beginning to build an identity of her own beyond her relationship. She became involved in philanthropic work and, over the years, developed a deep passion for a cause that would eventually become her life's mission. That cause was coffee farming in Rwanda, a project that would grow into a full enterprise and a reflection of who Grace truly was at her core. But life rarely holds its shape for long, even when it looks steady from the outside. In 1999, just 2 years after their wedding, reports emerged that the marriage was in serious trouble. The couple separated, and De Niro reportedly filed for divorce. The details were handled privately, but the fact of the separation became public. For a relationship that had seemed so grounded, the news came as a quiet shock. Then something unexpected happened. They reconciled. By 2004, Robert De Niro and Grace Hightower had renewed their vows in a ceremony that was, once again, private and away from public spectacle. Whatever had fractured between them had, it seemed, been repaired. They continued building their life together, and Grace continued developing her philanthropic work. For several years, the couple appeared to have found a durable equilibrium. De Niro remained one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood, continuing to take demanding roles well into his 70s. Grace maintained a lower profile, but a purposeful life. Then, in 2018, the story shifted again. Reports surfaced that De Niro and Grace Hightower had separated for a second time. Court documents indicated that De Niro had filed for divorce, and what followed became a prolonged, and, at times, public legal proceeding involving questions of finances, custody of their son Elliot, and the terms of their settlement. The proceedings stretched across several years and were reported on with the kind of detail that neither party had ever invited. By multiple accounts, the separation was painful and complicated. Those who had followed the couple over the years noted the sadness of watching something that had once felt so quietly hopeful come apart in the public record. Grace Hightower today leads a life that in many ways reflects the character she always seemed to have. She has channeled much of her energy into Grace Hightower and Coffees of Rwanda, a social enterprise she founded to support Rwandan coffee farmers, with a particular focus on empowering women in those communities. It is work that has earned genuine recognition and reflects a humanitarian commitment that predates and outlasts her public association with De Niro. She makes occasional public appearances, attends charitable events, and continues to raise Elliot, who was in his mid-20s as of recent years. She does not seek the spotlight, but she has not disappeared from public life entirely either. She has been photographed at events in New York, and she maintains a quiet but visible presence. The divorce proceedings between her and De Niro continued for years, with legal filings periodically drawing media coverage. De Niro has since moved forward in his personal life, having welcomed a daughter in 2023 with his partner Tiffany Chen, making him a father for the 7th time at age 79. Grace, from all available observation, has moved forward too, not loudly, not dramatically, but forward nonetheless. There is something worth sitting with in Grace Hightower's story. She entered one of the most high-profile relationships in American celebrity culture without pursuing it, without performing for it, and she has exited that chapter of her life with the same quiet resolve. She was never ordinary in the way the headlines implied. She was simply a woman who knew who she was, regardless of whose name was attached to hers. Celebrity marriages carry an enormous weight. They are projected onto, analyzed, and treated as public property. The people inside them rarely get the grace of a private struggle or a private ending. What this story asks of all of us, really, is a more honest question. When we watch a love story like this one from the outside, are we watching for understanding, or are we watching for the ending we already expected? And perhaps more personally, what does it say about us that we are still more curious about who she married than about who she became? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.